Namaste and greetings. I, Swati Solanki, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान, नई दिल्ली, extend my warm Namaste. I, Swati Solanki, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान, नई दिल्ली, extend my warm welcome to you all to IMPRI #Web Policy Talk. Today, we have gathered for a special talk on engaging the urban from the periphery as a part of the series, The State of Cities #City Conversations. The series is organized by IMPRI Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies. It is my privilege to introduce the eminent panelist for today's talk. We have Dr. Shubhra Gururani, who is Associate Professor at York University, Toronto, Canada. We welcome you, ma'am. We have Dr. Loraine Kennedy, who is CNRS Research Director at École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, Paris, France. We also have Dr. Ashima Sood, who is Associate Professor at Anant National University, Ahmedabad, Gujarat. We have Dr. Soumyadeep Chattopadhyay, who is Associate Professor at Visva University, West Bengal, and a Senior Fellow at IMPRI. We also have Professor Carol Upadhya, who is Professor at National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore. We have Liubing Xie, who is PhD scholar at University of California, Berkeley. We have Pratik Mishra, who is PhD scholar at King's College London, UK. And Ankita Rathi, who is Research Fellow at Institute of Rural Management, Anant at Gujarat. Now we look forward to an enriching deliberation with our panelists. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Swati, and I welcome all of you for this very important deliberation today. And I welcome all of you and especially thankful for joining from different parts of the world on this very important topic we are deliberating today. So without any further ado, I would like to invite Ashima ma'am to start with our presentation on this topic and take the panel forward. Ashima ma'am, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Kumar, for having us here. And we are really glad to be able to speak about these important topics today. I know that Dr. Chattopadhyay was to join us, and we are still hopeful that he'll be here. But let me just get started and start with the discussion today with a few remarks about the rationale and the origins of the discussion for everybody who's joining us today. I think the occasion, if you like, for our conversation today is the special issue that just came out in the journal Samaj, South Asia Multidisciplinary Academic Journal. And the issue title is Engaging the Urban from the Periphery, as you can see. So first, let me lay out a little bit of this, the rationale, where it is that, why is it that we are talking today and at this particular moment about the peri-urban and the peri-urban term. So first, let me put into context what Professor Shubhra Gururani of Michigan State University. She's not here today, but in the afterword to our issue, she calls the peripheral turn in urban studies. And of course, in just a little bit, Dr. Loraine Kennedy will be speaking about how it is that we and others have conceptualized the peripheral in relation to the urban. But before we do that, I thought let me actually remind ourselves that this next year, 2022, we will be celebrating the 20th anniversary of Gyan Prakash's celebrated essay on the urban turn in the Indian social science. And in fact, the new millennium has seen a decisive shift in the policy and research attention to the urban problematic. And as Gyan Prakash argued in his essay very memorably, it was a very long time coming. So why now this peri-urban term? So I think there are 2 or 3 important shifts, so you can call them maybe new recognitions about the trajectory of urbanization in India, which underlie, I think, the sort of particular urgency of our discussion today. First, I think most important is this remarkable growth and efflorescence, if you like, flowering of the census town. In lay terms, perhaps for those of us who are joining us today and are new to some of these discussions, in lay terms, we could think about the census town as an overgrown village. But in fact, in reality, they are something far, far more remarkable. So just to give you a sense of the numbers, between 2001 and 2011, the numbers of these census towns doubled from about 1,400 to 3,900. But more importantly, they contributed over a third of the overall urban growth in 2001 to 2011, compared to only apparently 6% in the period 1991 to 2001. And I'm citing here some of the analysis. There's been a lot of analysis, but particularly numbers given by Roy and Pradhan in 2018. Now, what are these census towns, right? As seats of urbanization without necessarily all the characteristics of cities, I think the challenges in very special ways. And they represent this very intriguing new urban frontier and new forms of what Dr. Shubhra Gururani and her co-authors have described as agrarian urbanization. I think there's a second context to our discussion today, which I talk about a little bit in my paper, which is, and not just me, but many of us have been saying this, that real estate capital is remaking the cartography of the urban in India and across the global south in unprecedented ways. Yet, unlike the subaltern urbanization of the census towns, which I was just describing, it is clustering unmistakably in the vicinity of India's largest mega cities and million plus. In the process, it is creating what I have called a new kind of speculative map of future urbanism. And it will have very important implications that we are just now beginning to trace on governance, migration patterns, informal urban growth, as well as social spatial inequality. So that's sort of broadly the context for our discussion today. But let me also take this opportunity to thank the many participants and well-wishers on our journey so far. This issue had its genesis with Dr. Loraine Kennedy's call to renew concepts and categories around the peri-urban question. And the call was crystallized in a series of panels that we organized in 2019 at the RC21 conference with, of course, Dr. Kennedy, Dr. Gururani, and myself. And we were really fortunate to have participating in our discussion scholars from multiple continents and speaking about the peri-urban condition, not only in India, but also Colombia, Kenya, and Ghana. And we are very thankful to the discussants at those panels, Shoshana Goldstein, George Jose, and Aditya Singh. And we are also very thankful, of course, to the contributors who enriched our understanding at the panel, especially Ratula Kundu, Eric Denis, Thomas Cohen, Marie-Helene Zara, Sudeshna Mitra, Sebastian Santamaria, Robin Janven Dujin, Chetan Chotani, Jan Nijman, MTR Chaudhary, Karen Pfeiffer, Berenice Bond, and Michael Schwinn. And we are very fortunate to have some of our contributors here today, of course, and that includes Professor Carol Upadhya, Prateek Mishra, Ankita Rathi, and Liubing Xie. And thank you again to the IMPRI team for being such generous hosts. And now over to you, Loraine.
Thank you very much, Ashima, for introducing the webinar today. In our introduction to this special issue that I co-wrote with Shubhra Gururani, we use, periphery as a concept rather than as a spatial category. We borrow from Teresa Caldera the idea of the periphery as a problem space. And so I want to be clear that we're not limited to looking at, say, the fringes of metropolitan cities. This is a much broader kind of a process, as Ashima mentioned. It's actually become a very vibrant field of research. And we're not only talking about what might be considered, subordinate spaces, but rather, endogenous kinds of processes which are happening across, the country. Ashima mentioned census towns, and we can think of small settlements as well. The periphery also is conceptual in the sense that it evokes non-mainstream. And this includes in urban scholarship. hence the title of the special issue, Engaging the Urban from the Periphery. And so a key question is, what can these types of studies bring to the conversation in urban studies, and especially urban theory? Now, we know that urbanization in India is driven these days by processes that are playing out in the peripheries. And, we can think of large-scale infrastructure projects, for instance, which are often state-driven. We can think of real estate investments. Ashima also mentioned this. These are mainly private sector-driven. We also include in our research these kind of incremental processes that are playing out, and that are more the result of kind of very decentralized, small-scale landowners who are seizing opportunities to leverage their plots and buy into the city of the future. Now, scholarship shows us that peri-urban spaces are sites of contestation. And we can, I think, most visibly see, and this is apparent in the literature as well, the fierce competition for land and resources. The peri-urban is also the site of competing land uses. I think we all have in our mind these images which are kind of dissonant images of rice fields or buffalo herds interspersed with housing complexes and private residential schools or self-built communities. Now, in this special issue of Samaj, we adopted a kind of a common thread throughout our papers to study these spaces, and this is through looking at what we call relational constructedness and the co-production of space by different categories of actors located at different spatial scales, from the local to the global. The papers in the collection interrogate and engage with this idea of co-production across three main arenas: space, politics, and subjectivities. Now, the production of space, or the transformation of the urban built environment, is one major area. We know that concrete infrastructures like roads and bridges and airports rely on financial infrastructures and on policy instruments, including ad hoc special purpose vehicles. Ashima and I have worked on these issues over the last years, and there's a growing body of research looking at this. Secondly, politics. The co-production of peri-urban space is fundamentally a political process, and all of the papers in the issue explore this dimension. I can mention Carol and Sachin Kumar's paper on the land struggles and caste in peri-urban Bangalore. Ashima also examines how migrants and other vulnerable groups seek to claim their right to the city while confronting assertive and revanchist, upwardly mobile middle classes in Delhi and in Hyderabad. Ankita investigates how agrarian dynamics embedded in regimes of caste, land, and work permeate and co-produce both the urban and the rural on the basis of her work in a small town in Punjab. And thirdly, subjectivities. Peri-urban spaces are aspirational spaces. And we have proceeded on the premise that spaces and subjectivities are relationally co-constructed. For instance, Pratik in his paper probes how mobility and migration intersect with urban policies to produce peripheral subjects, and he examines specifically the decision in Delhi to shift polluting industries, here brick making, to the urban periphery, and the subjective experience of brick workers as they circulate between jobs across the rural-urban frontier. And Liubing, in his paper, questions how and whether residential cohabitation of diverse social groups in peri-urban areas contributes to re-scripting social relations and forging new subjectivities. His paper is a comparative study of Hyderabad and Chengdu on the basis of some selected residential types, which are emblematic of those found in peri-urban India and China. Now, we have the good fortune of having all but one of our contributors here with us today, and so they will say more about their papers, and we're looking forward to that. And before I hand the mic over to Carol, I'd like to just say thanks to IMPRI for giving us this opportunity to share our recent work. Over to you, Carol.
Thanks, Loraine. Thank you very much.
Please go ahead, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm good. Sorry. So we are supposed to give a very brief overview of our papers so we can leave enough time for discussion. The paper which I contributed and wrote with my colleague Sachin Rathod was called Caste at the City's Edge, Land Struggles in Peri-Urban Bangalore. This paper came out of a long-term project that we were carrying out in Bangalore with colleagues at University of Minnesota called Speculative Urbanism, where we intended to look at the various kinds of changes that are being set in motion by real estate-led development in Bangalore, where we worked in both a core city site and a peri-urban site. And in the peri-urban villages where we carried out research, our interest was in understanding the ways in which agricultural land is alienated from farmers, mainly through market transactions, and converted into real estate. And the villages that are described in this paper were selected because they are the site of one of the largest residential, high-end residential apartment complexes in Bangalore, which was built on around 100 acres of land, which was purchased from around 100 households in one village. But as we started doing research there, we discovered that agricultural land and as well as common lands were being converted into real estate for other purposes as well, and in more incremental ways, and especially through what are often tagged as illegal practices and transactions, or we could call them informal practices. And this is because, of course, as you know, many scholars have now documented in peri-urban sites that with the rising demand for land and rising land values, a lot of money starts coming into land markets, creating a kind of a speculative booms where all kinds of people are investing in land. And what we kept hearing about a lot in these villages is land grabbing, which is a larger term, which actually is used in the English term is used in Kannada. And there's a larger discourse or political discourse in Bangalore around land grabbing in the context of the great kind of real estate boom that Bangalore has seen over the last 2 decades or so. And so one of the things that kept coming out at us as we carried out research there was the various ways in which caste was permeating these kinds of transactions and permeating really the operations of land market itself. And this is not something which is entirely unexpected, but I think what we found most fascinating was ways in which caste was intervening in these processes in ways in which were kind of unexpected. And in other words, we know from many studies that the powerful so-called dominant caste, landowning castes, do tend to have more advantage in new land markets, and they are the ones who are best able to accumulate capital and wealth through transacting in their own land and also acting as intermediaries in new land markets, which is what we saw in this case also. But the other side of it was the resistance that was being put up by Dalit groups who were arguing that it was their land in particular and common lands that were being appropriated illegally by ready landlords and by outsiders who were trying to accumulate land in these villages. And so we became very interested in the caste politics of land that was emerging in these sites. And began to think about questions about how caste is being reconfigured and respatialized through these struggles. And so the paper is about how caste is reconfigured as a mode of accumulation as well as an axis of struggles around land. So therefore we try to contribute to a broader understanding of the processes by which urban peripheries are being co-produced by social interactions of various groups, whether they are acting in concert or at cross purposes. So while members of the locally dominant Reddy caste who were the major landowners in the villages, were best placed to engage in land grabbing, we found that Dalits were also participating in the market in interesting ways, particularly as brokers. And they were building on the knowledge that they gained and the contacts that they were able to develop through their activities in the land market to contest what they were framing as the appropriation of the lands by Reddys. And the paper details the various ways in which both land grabbing is taking place, and very complicated ways, I should say, not through one kind of route, and also the various modalities to which Dalits challenge the social power of Reddys in this context. And to do that, we also had to frame these particular very kind of micro-level cases within the larger regional context. And I had to spend a lot of time going back into the agrarian history of the Mysore region in order to understand, really to explain the kind of the ways in which place-embedded caste identities seem to be informing struggles around land in the context of urbanization. The paper is situated within the larger framework of agrarian urbanization, which Shubhra has been elaborating on for several years now, which argues that we need to attend to the specific regional and agrarian locations and histories of cities if we are going to understand these complex processes of urbanization. And because in South Asia, as we all know, landholding and agricultural production have historically been grounded in caste, and a grounding which has very significant regional variations. Our larger argument is that we really need to attend to the intersections of caste and land much more carefully within particular agrarian formations if we are going to make sense of the kind of urban transitions that we are seeing in peri-urban sites such as this one. And as Shubhra has pointed out in her writing, that this historical entanglement of land and caste has been well documented in agrarian and rural studies, and yet is only recently becoming a topic of interest in urban scholarship. And the other part of the larger argument that I'm working towards in this paper, and another paper that was recently published, drawing on the case of Ahmedabad in Andhra, is that we need to look beyond a kind of simplistic understanding of caste as simply another axis of social and economic inequality, or as a basis of political identity that is invoked and deployed in particular situations. Rather, I'm trying to build up this notion, drawing from earlier work of Barbara Harris White and others, of understanding caste as a social structure of accumulation, whose particular characteristics are defined by regionally specific histories of development, modes of production, systems of political authority, and collective memories of oppression and struggle. From this perspective, I think if we look at these struggles around land that are unfolding across India in all kinds of sites, not only peri-urban, but of course the large literature on land acquisition and so on, we begin to see how caste is really at the center of processes of when agrarian land is taking on new values and affordances in the context of being appropriated for real estate, or in the context of urbanization. As land becomes a site of speculative investment, we see caste also being reconfigured and redeployed in important ways, and in particular as an axis of struggle. So I'll stop here to give time to others. Thank you.
Over to you, Ankita, I believe. Ankita, go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone. So this paper is essentially part of my PhD thesis, which I submitted last year. And the fieldwork for this paper was conducted in 2015, 2016 in the Patiala district of Punjab. So the primary motivation for this paper, and as also for my PhD thesis, was to try and understand
to try and speak to this body of work that is being trying to investigate urban beyond the city, urban in the larger, in the global case, looking at new ranks of global cities apart from those in the global north. In the Indian case, trying to look at urban peripheries of existing big cities, or rural villages across the highways and small towns. In the Indian case, especially, there's been a mounting interest, as Ashima mentioned. There's been a mounting interest to study these new urban small towns and new urban centers. More so as the 2011 Census of India revealed growth of these new census towns. Essentially, these are small towns. Scholars have characterized them as subaltern urbanization, because much of these small towns are spatially away, are spatially autonomous from any big city, and there's been a great effort to kind of understand how this autonomy has kind of works. So in this context, I also kind of, my paper is kind of in this line of work. I study a small town called Patna in the Patiala district of Punjab. Patiala, which was part of the princely state until the pre-independence period, and it's a class 3 urban center, and it's a class 3 urban center. It's located in the southwestern part of Patiala, and it was designated. It was essentially a small agrarian village until the 1960s. It was in only the 1971. It was designated. It was given the status of a notified area committee when a FCI, when a FCI was the Food Corporation of institution was set up there in 1966, and a state-led agro purchase center was set up there in 1971. Therefore, it was given the status of notified area committee. By the 1990s, it was a Nagar Council, and now it's a municipal council. So it's a small town. When you look at the town, it almost seems like it has this strong agrarian character, it has a vibrant mandi. It's a mandi town. It's a fairly, it is a big agro purchase center of paddy and wheat, and also has a vibrant consumption goods economy, a bazaar economy, as you would say. I would like to just focus on one key argument that I make in trying to understand Patna's urban transformation from a very small agrarian village to an agro-commercial hub. I argue that Patna kind of represents a case of peripheral urbanization, not just because of its geographical peripheral position, in contrast relative to a big city like Patiala, but also because it kind of incorporates relationships, arrangements, logics that kind of do not really fit well into this urban dynamics of when we talk about global cities or the world-class cities. It has a strong agrarian character, and the consumption economy largely caters to the rural population. So I try and argue that Patna's transformation has been driven by the historical and the very contemporary process of agrarian change that occurred in the region, in Punjab and in the Patiala region. It was driven by the socio-political changes that were happening in agriculture during the time of, firstly, from its transition during the mass peasant movement that occurred in Pepsu to end tenancy, and then it led to a state-driven land reforms, and leading to the central strategy of green revolution to make agriculture prosperous. So that kind of provided the initial trajectory to Patna's urban transformation. So Patna, so I'd like to focus on one key thing. I use the conceptual framework of agrarian urbanism. Why? Because I argue that Patna's transformation was driven by the way in which land and kind of caste was transforming because of the agrarian changes occurring in the region. And this kind of agrarian changes, it kind of encompasses, so urban the making of Patna itself is a process of making and unmaking. It emerged as a huge agriculture hub in the 1950s and 60s because of the Green Revolution. But post the 1990s, you see a stagnancy that also was kind of driven by the fact that agriculture sector began to kind of slow down. So, and I argue that this kind of agrarian changes encompasses experiences of communities, their struggles, their resistance, their negotiation strategies. So I kind of, for example, show which if, and some of these responses of these communities have been driven by agrarian changes, by the, they kind of incorporate agrarian aspirations, dreams, needs, driven by the Green Revolution. So for example, I show that in the early periods of the Green Revolution, Jats, the regional dominant caste group, when it was kind of accumulating capital in the rural, it is the Hindu traders who brought in capital, who migrated to the town and kind of got into trade and commerce. An essential part of the Green Revolution was to have these agro-purchase centers at various villages. Patna was one such village where an agro-purchase center was set up, which brought in a lot of trade and commerce, and it brought the Hindus, the Hindu trading caste, the Paniyas there into the town. And as the Jats accumulated their position in the rural, the Hindus kind of changed the social geography of, they invested heavily in rice mills, in agro trading, in agro inputs, also significantly in the property sector. Now, what we see is that there's a changing response of these communities as stagnation begins to kind of set in. Agrarian, because of the agrarian uncertainties, the Jats who kind of take great pride in rurality, in agrarian identity, have tried to now move beyond the rural, are wanting to move beyond and have moved beyond the rural into the urban. The bigger ones have been able to kind of invest heavily in property, palatial houses. The smaller ones have gotten into public sector jobs because of the historically dominant position in the state's administration. Now, when you look at Gujars, that's another community. It was a community that gained heavily during the land reforms. Where they were able to channelize their resources during the Green Revolution. They were able to channelize their resources in buying better quality land in nearby villages. But uncertainties have enabled them to step into the urban non-farm sector. They now also work as, they combine agriculture work with the urban non-farm wage work. Similarly, the Hindus, the traders, who primarily are the economic players kind of in the paddy wheat sector, are also reinvesting the agrarian capital back into the rural. So what we see here is that communities are kind of responding. Much of these changes that is happening in this town is because of the ways communities are responding to agrarian uncertainties. And this kind of change has not really kind of withered the rural links. They continue to be tied to the rural. That's a very important point. This kind of urbanism has responded to changes in agriculture, but has not kind of withered the rural agrarian links. So I think I'd like to end by raising, I think this is a very important question that we can raise is India's urbanization kind of is responding to agrarian uncertainties, because much of the changes in the agriculture sector have been spoken only within the domain of agrarian studies. But urban is kind of responding to the uncertainties in the agriculture as well. And can the agriculture sector be a very important safety net for the urban? Yeah. So I think I'll kind of end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ankita. And, I think very insightful. Now over to you, Pratik.
Yes, thank you so much. It's really great to sort of speak in this panel, and I thank the organizers for organizing this. So I'm going to talk about my paper, which basically draws from my PhD thesis. Within my PhD thesis, I actually look at brick kilns as a sort of specific mode of production, a specific site where you have certain relations. So I sort of capture the specific relation to ecology that is constructed through brick kilns, the specific relation of reproductive practices and productive identities that are sort of immanent within the brick kilns. And within this paper, I have sort of tried to capture the specific relation to urbanity that's sort of constructed through brick kilns, the urbanity and processes of circular migration. Now, when I speak of the urban, I have to say that, one has to think of brick kiln as brick kiln clusters, because there are also brick kilns in the rural. There are also these kind of small individual units that cater to a rural demand. But what I actually probe is the kind of large clusters of large scale brick kilns that produce maybe like 1 crore or 2 crore bricks in a season. And those are specifically a peri-urban phenomenon today. Those are, in fact, one of my professors used to say that, you could be on a train and you would see the brick kilns arrive, you'd be entering a city from the farms and you'd see the brick kilns, and you would kind of get a clue to the city as being imminent, as the boundaries of the city as coming over. And so to sort of talk about the particular relation in which brick kilns have to the urban. And within the paper, I sort of trace how brick kilns that have now become this kind of peri-urban infrastructure were actually not peri-urban to begin with. So specifically in Delhi, brick kilns were actually in the center of the city. If you relate to the mode of sort of production, the technology of brick kilns at that time, as well as the aspect of transporting these heavy bricks, because bricks constitute a sort of heavy materiality. In fact, brick kilns up till the 1960s, 70s used to be in sort of the center of Delhi. So if you look at maps of Delhi in 1890s, you would see brick kilns around Chandni Chowk. You'll see it in 1920s, you'll see brick kilns around Lutyens, Delhi. And they would really be sort of concentrated along hubs of where construction was booming. And so then I sort of try to see the history of how brick kilns were sort of pushed out to the periphery. And here you sort of understand that this process has been sort of evolved. So the first major sort of colonial law that tried to push brick kilns out to the periphery was in 1941. And during that time, the major concern for brick kilns within the city, aside from their sort of unsightly look, was their impact on public health, and specifically the incidence of malaria that was being caused because of the holes that were dug in the ground from the extraction of soil. And then to sort of trace it through the 70s and the 80s and how that discourse shifted from malaria to air pollution in a way that we recognize now. And to sort of capture this process of how brick kilns were shifted out of the city of Delhi and now to peri-urban villages 40, 50 kilometers away, which happened through not a single process. It happened through particular court judgments like the iconic MC Mehta judgment. It happened through master plans. It happened through sort of economic processes where land became costly. But to sort of then question where was labor within this kind of displacement, where was labor within this disposition of brick kilns from the city to the peri-urban. And here you find the kind of curious absence where brick kilns are always spoken of in a labor idiom. They're always spoken of in relation to, sites of modern slavery or, sites of debt bondage and abuse. And in fact, brick kilns also heavily feature in parliamentary debates as a kind of proxy for poverty or proxy for labor exploitation. But in actual processes of when these brick kilns were displaced, you have this kind of very non-specific clause around labor's welfare. To begin with, I won't go into detail. To begin with, in surveys after surveys, you find that the number of brick kiln workers were never properly recorded. So in 1954, the Brick Kiln Owner Association that wanted to showcase how important it was as a owners, as a community, stated that they employ 30,000 workers in Delhi. That's in 1954 and 1954. In 1988, when Delhi government was asked in a parliamentary question, how many workers and how many brick kilns exist in Delhi, they reply, there are 388 brick kilns with 25,000 workers, which doesn't make sense because not only have the number of workers decreased, but also that averages out to 64 workers in a single brick kiln, which even if you take for account the uncounting of women and children that happens in labor statistics, even if you take just the number of males, that is not a realistic amount of number that can actually sustain a major producing brick kiln in a city like Delhi. So I sort of process, try to sort of collect all these archival resources to sort of try to understand how historically labor has been situated in this move within brick kilns. And then I sort of take it to the present. And in the present, what you'll find in a contemporary moment, this sort of historical process was brought about by the air pollution crisis. So in 2019, when I was doing fieldwork, the graded action plan for controlling air pollution, which sort of becomes an emergency measure every winter. And in fact, it was in existence in years prior to it. Suddenly, in the year of my fieldwork, became a major policy discourse and was suddenly imposed with a stringency that wasn't present in previous years. And I could see, the deep crisis that followed, because brick kilns are a specific site where there is a conflation or sort of the interlocking of production and reproduction space. So workers actually stay in the brick kilns and work there for 8 months. And there's also the relation of debt bondage. So idle time or time where you're not producing does not only produce wagelessness or the lack of wage, but it also actively translates to debt. It actively translates to the debt that you had already received and that is accumulating in your name. And so within that intersection, I could actually find the contemporary process of how the protection of Delhi's air created a deep crisis when these brick kilns were suddenly shut down for 3 months and workers had to, just stay in the kiln and, let the debt accumulate, and they had a really bad season in 2019. And so that's one process by which in the paper I look at brick kilns and its relation to urbanity. But then there is a further process where I think of peri-urban as sort of this relational labor-centered discourse, and to think of how the periphery is constructed is also embodied and sort of constructed by these devalorized migrant circulations between the brick kilns and other spots. So specifically, I focused on circular migration between the brick kilns and the city. And what I found out, basically this emerged from me collecting a lot of life histories of brick kiln workers during my fieldwork, where I sort of asked, in different years, where have you been, and you would find that all of these brick kiln workers had really sort of fascinating stories. They have worked in farming in 1 year. They worked in, being a truck driver in another year. They've tried to sort of assemble an urban livelihood in 1 year. And even seasonally, they leave the brick, they work in the brick kilns for 8 months, but in the remaining 4 months, they may work in specific construction sites. They may work as a rickshaw driver in, Azad Nagar, or they may go back to Bihar and Bilaspur, where all the brick kiln workers I interviewed were from, and work as, either construction workers or agriculture workers. And so in sort of tracing these migration, I tried to find out what were the main sort of sources through which Brickian, circularity was constituted. And so without going into detail, I sort of found out that, one of them was about managing bodily damage. So, Brickians are a specific mode of work versus which is really tiring and really long work, but it is not hazardous. And so there is this kind of like managing bodily strain through juggling between different kinds of work. There's also this very interesting question of sociality. So most of Brickian workers, you would find they migrate with their families, but they're also mostly, these families are the sort of the center, the head of the household is the middle-aged male. And what you'd usually find in terms of male migrant labor circulation is that 18-year-old boys or 16-year-old boys, they grow up in Brickians. They have had no education because they've been migrating with their parents to the Brickians since they were children. But at the age of 16, the regimented sort of life of the Brickians becomes too constraining for them, and they move out to seek factory work. They move out to do all these other kinds of work, and then they return to the Brickians at the age of 30 when they want to keep family close. So all these discourses, for example, a young person says that you become dark-skinned when you work in the Brickians. Yahan pe man nahi lagta, like I don't feel like working here. Yahan pe akal nahi badti. I don't get smart when I work in a Brickian, and so I sort of try to look at the urban and other sites of work where where an escape is sought. And then when you look at people who are in their 30s, they sort of don't want the kind of translocal households where you're hearing about a crisis from your family through the phone, and if you want to keep your family close, then it's one of the major reasons that you would migrate to a Brickians. So broadly, I'm almost running out of time. So broadly, I look at Brickians in the frame of this kind of space where there is a devaluation of labor, and I also look at Brickians both in relation to Vinay Gidwani's work of the infra economy, which speaks of a space that has been denied recognition by state and civil society, but is also critical to the production of urban space. And I also look at, and also sort of related to Sital Chhabria's work as the peripheries of urban cities not being bound in space alone, but in the bodies and circulations of migrant workers. So generally, I sort of combine these two, both contemporary patterns of circular migration and mobility, contemporary processes of urban privileging or urban impact on Brickians, which is sort of instantiated through the air pollution crisis in Delhi, and the historical process of how Brickians were moved out of Delhi, to sort of eclectically comprise this process to understand Brickians in relation to urbanity and sort of raise questions about peripheral urbanization as both, implicated in the transformation of urban hinterlands as industrial spaces, and also implicated within the kind of circular migration trajectories of certain and various segments of labor. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Prateek. I think just a really valuable and much needed labor lens on the peri-urban. And now I'd like to invite Liubing, who's going to give us a very, very valuable, again, comparative perspective, looking at the Indian and the Chinese cases. And so over to you, Liubing.
Hi, everyone. I'll be trying to be brief. So my research project presented in the article in the special issue originates from my observation that observation in China and in India, that in the peripheries of the metropolitan regions, both established and new residents of various kinds of ethnic, religious, linguistic, regional backgrounds inhabit common residential spaces, which I refer as residential cohabitation. So in this paper, which is sort of exploratory work, I intended to study these patterns of urban relationalities that emerge between different social groups that cohabit in the urban peripheries in China and India, particularly in conjunction with the evolving built environment in the peripheries. And to do so, I juxtapose selected sites from the peripheries of Chengdu in China and Hyderabad in India. So the two megacities that actively engage in the strategies to position themselves in the globalizing projects. So inspired by the kind of work on urban assemblages, and also Massey's notion of coexisting heterogeneities, I deploy the concept of assemblage of living together to show how, in the wider context of socio-economic change taking place in these different peripheral sites, new configurations of sociality or new assemblages of living together emerge alongside this kind of constantly changing built environment. I wanted to particularly focus on this kind of co-production and co-evolution of social relationality and the forms of built environments. So, so then I will introduce like the three kind of configurations of residential cohabitation I identified that is common in both Hyderabad and Chengdu. The first one is this kind of interspersion of gated communities and auto-constructed communities. In China would be urban villages, and in India would be the these kind of villages near the peripheries or basti, etc. And this kind of interspersion is particularly characterized by geographical proximity and at the same time physical separation, often marked by physical boundaries such as walls, gates, green belts, and wide streets that is erected by the planning bureaus or residents themselves. And these kind of physical boundaries demarcate the territories of the residential communities. And the second kind of cohabitation I identified is a kind of internal heterogeneities that and separate living of different social, ethnic, and religious and regional groups within the same residential areas, be it gated community or auto-constructed communities. I found that just not only the auto-constructed communities have different groups of villagers and incoming migrants living together. For example, I focused on this evolving relations between the buffalo herders and the farmers in one village near the financial district around Hyderabad. And in addition, in these kind of gated communities in the around Hyderabad and Chengdu's urban peripheries, they are also very heterogeneous along the lines of ethnicity, religion, and nationality, also along the lines of homeowners and along the lines of divide between homeowners and renters. And the third kind of configuration of cohabitation I identified is this kind of vertical cohabitation within the auto-constructed rental housing in the villages in Chengdu and in Hyderabad. So in this kind of auto-constructed multi-story rental housing owned by the villagers, this kind of cohabitation pattern is often that the villager landlords live at the ground floor and the renters occupy the upper floors. And the spatial patterns of living at different floors, on one hand, separate the living and socializing spaces of landlords and renters. At the same time, also allowing the landlords managing and surveilling the activities of the migrant renters. So within these three configurations of living together, I argue that like two types of relationalities emerged alongside with the evolving built environments. And each kind of relationality has its own paradox. So the first kind of relationality is this absence of social interaction despite geographical proximity. So different social groups are physically proximate in all three configurations of living together. They socialize separately according to norms. And these kind of norms often materialize as physical boundaries, such as walls and green belts and white roads and different floors of buildings. And the second kind of social relationality is kind of unequal relation of interdependence. I discovered that certain forms of economic interdependence occur between different social groups in the urban peripheries, particularly the kind of employment relations between the residents of elitist gated communities and residents of auto-constructed communities. And on the other hand, the landlord-tenant relations within the auto-constructed communities. However, this kind of economic interdependence doesn't lead to further social solidarity. I found that this kind of dependence is really based on unequal interactions, particularly expressed through the attitudes or kind of discrimination towards certain groups of people, particularly migrant workers and migrant tenants. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liubing. And now over to you, Shubhra.
Thank you so much, Ashima. I just wanted to mention that Ashima also has a paper in the collection, which she has agreed to not speak about to give us more time. So I'll not take much time. I've given myself 6 minutes. It was wonderful to listen to all the papers, even though one has read them before. So thank you for your presentations. And once again, thanks to IMPRI for giving us the platform to host this session, and especially to Samaj for their very, efficient reviewing process and very quick delivery on this. So please, Loraine, convey our gratitude for their job very well done. So thanks again. In my presentation, I don't really have a presentation. I have scribbled notes here and there, and that is the pleasure of going last, that you can scribble them at the end. One of the questions which has been raised here in all the papers and by Ashima and Loraine as well, why the periphery? I mean, what is it about the periphery and how we think about the periphery? And we, of course, build on a large and growing body of scholarship, which is now talking about the peripheral turn, the peri-urban literature. And as Loraine mentioned, that we adopt a very capacious understanding of periphery, which is not geographically situated. But one of the things which all the papers talk about is that it's about the kind of that periphery as a generative space for us, both to intervene in urban theory and also to thinking about urban policy, that periphery as a particular kind of site, a particular kind of volatile, highly contested, and a very uneven terrain to thinking about the space called the urban. And when we think about the place called the urban, we actually found that the Lefebvre concept of co-production, as Loraine mentioned, to be highly productive for us, and the co-production of space, politics and practice, which we bring together in conversation with Doreen Massey's work on co-production of space and subject. And now what is co-production? Again, about, as Liubing just talked about, and as did Prateek and Ankita and Carol and Ashima in their papers, are really about the question of relationality, the relational constructedness of these peripheries, and to thinking about heterogeneities. And in fact, this is what our collection has done, is to bring out very different dynamics, which are both at the simultaneously local, regional, and has a host of actors, both national and global. And something which comes out in the peripheries for us is the incomplete nature of it, of constantly being in making, as we call it in our introduction, as a kind of places in making and place making exercises, which are quite interesting for researchers to think about what is it about the peripheries that brings out. So when we're thinking of peripheries, we are thinking in relational terms. And here, of course, relation between the city and the periphery. But as Ankita pointed out, what is in the context of India, which is still predominantly agrarian, it's the relation between simultaneous co-production of urbanization and de-agrarianization, which is taking place, and the contemporary farmers' movements that is gripped India right now, is precisely an enunciation of some of the anxieties, the tensions, which are reworking the politics of land, politics of caste, of government interventions. And of course, something which came out in the papers was the ways in which the relationship between social groups, as Liubing points out and Carol points out, and so does all the papers, is of the question of caste. It's highly enhanced, it works along with class, and to throw the light on the changing dynamics of caste and how propertied classes and propertied castes are getting reorganized, is urging us to rethink what can the processes of urbanization in the Indian context can help us think about urban theory at large, which has had different lenses and vectors to think about. But as we think about the question of co-production, of course, the challenge is the question of how. How do we study the co-production of these spaces and subjectivities in politics? And that takes me to the question of methodology and the question of urban actually calls for a particular kind of a multimodal approach to thinking about collecting data. How do we study the space, something which is incomplete, something which is as always under construction, something, and as we all know, if you go to some place like Gurgaon, where I do my field work, it looks different every time. I don't have my spots finally firmly located. The landscape looks different, the maps look different, boundaries look different. What does it mean then to do field work or collect data in such kind of highly volatile, highly dynamic spaces? And here the question of adopting a range of research methodologies, which all our papers do, of course, about ethnographic research, qualitative research, quantitative work, oral histories, archives become a rich repertoire to draw from. But I also think we need to think more about doing different kinds of and more innovative kind of field work and data collection, perhaps thinking through visual methodologies, thinking through other ways of archiving and documenting a dynamic changing space. And that's a question I leave it open to the panel and to the attendees to think about how actually can we map something which is constantly changing. And this is a question for anthropologists, how to map space and time, which is not stable, but constantly transforming. And here I think it requires us to also reflect on the multidisciplinary approach to the study of the urban. What are the pitfalls and the possibilities that it may open for us? And I think here, when I think about the multimodal, multidisciplinary approach to the urban and rethink the urban from the global south, I'm thinking about the challenge of comparison and what does the comparative gesture mean. And I think our papers have that. Ashima's paper brings Hyderabad and Noida into question. And I think all of us have thought about it, and Liubing much more directly is thinking about this. And again, we need to think about what can this kind of situated understanding of the periphery contribute to the growing debate in comparative urbanism. What are the possibilities, and precisely from a place, from the peripheral locations. The other question which we have thought about was the question of scaling it up. That is about forging conversations beyond India, taking it to, for instance, to China and beyond, to thinking about the ways in which the space of the periphery can allow us to think about urban theory itself, and as we thought about initially, was revisit some of the core categories of the urban, which are tended to dominate urban theory. And finally, these are a bunch of questions which we have, and I think some of these have also been mentioned in Shufei's afterward to our special issue. But and I think, what are the possibilities and limits, and what are the blind spots that she mentions, and what can be offered in terms of thinking through multidisciplinary approaches, and how can this work can be taken outside of India and South Asia and beyond. And finally, one word I wanted to say about collaboration. And having just finished this with Loraine and Ashima, I just wanted to say that there is something to learn about collaborative research. And it was a pleasure to work with an economist, a political sciences, and anthropologist coming together and bringing our different disciplinary trainings and thinking in common ways, and to energize the debate on urban theory and urban policies possibly. And that's what I think there is a possibility to take this forward. And on that note, I will just open the forum for further discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shubhra. I think you sort of brought together the themes and the discussion beautifully. And I see that there's already a question here in the chat, and it's addresses all of us to a degree, but then also specifically to Liubing, I think. So I think the question is first, and Loraine, maybe you might want to take this. This is from Professor Sheila Prasad, of course, from University of Hyderabad, and she said, how would subaltern urbanization complicate the narratives of peripheral urbanization? And how is peripheral urbanization different from our part of subaltern urbanization? And then, of course, Liubing, there's also a question to you about how is it that these two places are comparable, because the governance and social structures in the two settings are quite disparate.
Yeah, I'm happy to take the first part. Thank you very much, Sheila, for posing this question, because it gives me a chance to clarify this important research on subaltern urbanization that's been undertaken. I'm thinking of French colleagues and Indian colleagues who have been working on this in the last 10 years. This is really the heart of what we're talking about. In fact, subaltern urbanization is very much about peripheral kind of processes, away from metropolitan areas. And I think we all learned a lot from that scholarship, about this idea that globalization is not only happening in metropolitan cities, that small settlements are engaged with the global in different ways, and that there's a lot of kind of endogenous sort of things happening. And likewise, what we're also mobilizing the work on agrarian urbanism. We're sort of pooling all this and trying to build on this body of work over the last 10 years or so. And so no, it's very much part of that. And I think we're all learning, from this research. So I'll let Liubing answer more specifically this question about Chengdu and Hyderabad.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Sheila. I think like it's to do kind of a comparative work between China and India indeed is very challenging. And what I did in this project is really like to find the commonalities between the two sites in the urban peripheries, and there are a lot. So I feel like there may be in some other aspects like some other aspects like social protest or social movement. There are a lot of differences in terms of that. But like I find the very there's like very key commonality I can really put Chengdu in dialogue with Hyderabad in this kind of intersection of kind of a globalization, the kind of project of very strong state initiative to globalize the city, the urban peripheries, and which interacts with various different kinds of local conditions, local norms and customs. This is like the key, the kind of the axis that I used to compare Chengdu and China to have a little bit more, to put it more precisely that in Chengdu, we have this, like in the urban periphery where I went for field work, there is this global, globalizing, I would say globalizing project to build this kind of global tourist destination, to have this like a theme park, very like Western, modeled after some Western theme park, the kind of very huge theme park, and also a set of high-end gated communities to attract middle class to live there. And in Hyderabad, of course, we have this Cyberabad, and then the financial district that is to host the global companies, and then this kind of projects intersects with these rural communities, and this kind of intersection is what I find really comparable in both in Chengdu and Hyderabad.
So, thanks so much. I think I certainly see a lot of I think value in this comparative gesture. Maybe Shubhra, since you did mention this, you might want to add a little bit more about specifically the comparison between the Chinese case and of course the Indian case. And I think the comparison of these two particular cities, Chengdu and Hyderabad, is particularly very valuable, because exactly as Liubing says, there is the state initiative and then, the private actors alongside.
Ashima, there are some questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. So, let me just read them out. Would you like to respond to this at all, Shubhra, this particular question? Or should we just perhaps move on, take all the questions, and then maybe we can come back and answer all of them together? So I see that there is, an anonymous attendee saying that, there are lots of new things for somebody outside of urban studies. And they ask, could engaging the urban from the periphery also include areas of study on urbanization that are on the margins and intersections, right? And I think it's worth thinking about what are the margins and what are the intersections, and what are the tangible impacts of such research and inquiry, and how does the pandemic affect the discussion and the approach on this? And I think this is also a methodological question. So I think this is definitely one that perhaps all of us have been engaging with, rather grappling with in our various ways. And I think, there should be a lot of insight from all of us to be able to speak to this question. I see also a question from Ram Mohan Chitta, who's worked with us on many of our projects. And Ram Mohan says, I have an interest in understanding forceful peripheral rehousing of the poor, right? And I think this is a very important phenomenon that, to a degree, some of us have addressed in our papers. And so he says, on the other hand, I'm also exploring aspirational migrants who settle on the periphery within auto-constructed spaces to participate in the growing economy of the SEZs or the gig economic opportunities. And so how should scholars engage with the impact of capital as a force in shaping these contrasting aspirational and forced peripheral communities? And I think this, really goes to the heart also of, some of what Liubing was describing, right? Sort of these typologies of cohabitation. Perhaps Shubhra, you might want to start, or Loraine, if you might want to get us started, and then I'll, turn it over to our contributors.
Well, I'm happy to chime in quickly. Thank you for these questions. The first one, let's see, it just disappeared. There it is. Yes, okay, so Pratik has offered already a start of an answer. I would just like to say that our idea of periphery, again, as a kind of a conceptual category, is definitely compatible with looking at margins of all kinds, even, marginality within urbanized spaces. The whole idea was to try to move away from a kind of a fixed spatial category and really think about what margins and peripheries can tell us about, urbanization more broadly. So yes, definitely that's part of it. Someone else want to come in?
I think relates to what the question just being raised about housing is Ratula. Hi, Ratula has asked a question. Wanted to ask if we are continuing to draw a distinct spatial and administrative boundaries between the city and the periphery through our work on peripheral urbanization. And I think that's an important question, that are we actually resuscitating the idea of what a city is by focusing only on the periphery? What do we have to say about urbanization and how we conceptualize a city also as a process? I think crucial questions. I think when the reason for, and I think important, and I think it really is when we started thinking about the peripheries, it was not something which is outside of the city or something which is not related to the city, but in fact thinking about the dynamic relations between the city and its outside as part of the RC21 theme, thinking beyond the city and thinking of urban itself as not only within the city, but urban that exceeds the city and into the rural, into the hinterlands, and in fact is co-constituted through these processes. So in that sense, yes, these are not clearly demarcated, but relationally produced spaces. And so absolutely city and urban and peripheries are not distinct, but highlighting the role of these peripheries or these in the policy circle spaces that are thought of as non-urban or as peripheral to the urban, to bringing them center stage, to be thinking about how the urban, and particularly in the context of India, the rural gets to be co-produced and is constitutive of the urban and of the city. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that is not certainly to revive or to reinscribe the distinction between the city and the periphery, but to highlight the relationality. So that's, I don't know, Loraine and Ashima, if you want to pitch in.
Yeah, absolutely. I would want to speak to, two sets of, I think, questions that have come up. And I do see a link between, the point that Ratula is making, Champaka is also asking about, these exclusionary forms of urban governance that we are seeing emerge And also I think Ram Mohan's point about, the forced as well as the aspirational forms of, peripheral urbanization and, urban habitation. I think the point that sort of connects all of these, and I sort of think very much in terms of concrete places, right? And I think about concrete examples, and it seems to me that the city as a process, Ratula, to think about, specifically, that set of questions around, what is the city as a process? Certainly in Hyderabad, one of the interesting things that we see over a period of time is, looking at how the municipal boundaries have changed. And certainly in my own paper, I see the municipal boundary as a pretty core characteristic of what we describe as, the central city versus what we might call the periphery, right? And the periphery is in fact a place of shifting governance arrangements. That is what defines the periphery in relation to the urban, right? That is what demarcates it. But over a period of time, one of the interesting things that we see when we sort of trace the growth of even the Greater Hyderabad Municipal Corporation, which was set up in 2007, 2008, and of course, Loraine has written a lot about this. Is that it's been a process of this sort of dynamic absorption and inclusion of municipalities on the boundaries, right? That leads to sort of the expansion of the city. And I certainly think that we have not paid enough attention to forms of government, right? Whether it is, as Champaka is correctly saying, all of these sort of specialized forms of government, the public sector corporations that are sort of serving as essentially the de facto government in many of these areas, whether you look at the Noida Authority or you look at large parts of Hyderabad. When I started looking at this data, I was very surprised to see that there are a large number of census towns, that are demarcated. They do not have a statutory government, but they do have these specialized forms of government, right? And they are all, above, they are very substantial in size, just like Noida, right? Noida is like some, I think, sort of very, very large and very, very significant population centers which do not have a municipal government, right? And so this is very much, part of the, I think, urbanization process, but also, the process of urban growth. We know that migration contributes very little to urban growth in India. And it's really sort of this transformation of spaces from, being rural to coming to be defined as urban. And in that, implicated in that process is also, what Gopa Samanta has talked about, the unacknowledged urbanization. And that's something that I think we should be paying a lot more attention to. And I think that also connects very much to what Ram Mohan is saying about, the aspirational, urban development, right, of the SEZs. And, all of these gated communities that Liubing has been describing, that leads the way, but then those also become the nodes of new kinds of informal, and I think of these as really the market forces of urban growth, right? So I think that there's definitely a connection and there is a process implicated there. And, it's really over time, once we start paying attention, that we can actually trace the process. Not just in these particular case studies, but hopefully in many other settings as well. And, of course, it would be very interesting to hear from, certainly, Carol might want to say something about this and how this process has played out in Bangalore.
Yeah, can I jump in here?
Absolutely, Carol, please do.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I just wanted to add to that.
Add 2 questions. Yes, Caroline, please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. No, I just wanted to add briefly to this point about the boundaries and governance, that in the Bangalore case, the villages, when we selected them, we were not being very purposive about location. It more had to do with the location of real estate projects. But it turned out that one village was located just inside the municipal boundary and one was just outside. And we came to realize quite quickly that, that was the main thing that really differentiated how the land markets were working, because different rules apply, right? Whether you're inside the municipal boundary or you're outside and you're still governed by the revenue department. And in Bangalore, what's called the Green Belt. And so almost everything else flowed from that difference. And so I also became interested in this question of contestations around administrative boundaries, where in Bangalore, every time they decide to redraw the master or revise the master plan, there are all kinds of, political contestations around which villages get included and which don't. And that all has to do, again, with who owns land and land politics and the rest of it. So I'm just reinforcing this point that, we need to pay a lot more attention to these governance structures, but also to the politics that produce them, especially on the edges of cities.
Can I just respond to carry on the conversation? Okay. Loraine, why don't you go ahead?
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just wanted to, thank you, Champaka, for your paper, question, and also to Ratula's question that, I think in terms of thinking about the question of governance and what are the shifting and the contested terrain of governance is, conceptually, we can argue and we can analyze that, but the challenge which Ratula is pointing out is actually real in terms of how do we actually map it? How do we capture the contestations and what kind of research methodologies we need to adopt? And it has to be a very different kind of research approach in terms of a slow research, a very slow, grounded, everyday nature of research is what it calls for. And if you want to understand the local level politics of caste, of class, of land, of access, of exclusion, of segregation, and it's subtle, it's not something which can be captured often through numbers may actually be helpful only to a certain extent, and that may be that the multidisciplinary approach to thinking about this kind of constructedness would be very useful to, while the slow ethnographic research in mapping the constructedness of boundaries and the blurring of these boundaries and the contestations can be captured at the everyday level to ethnographic work, scaling it up requires a different kind of lens to bringing it outside, and hence thinking through comparativeness would be a way to capture precisely what you're saying in terms of how they're maintained, by whom, who are the range of actors who come into play, and how are the local histories and politics of domination inform these boundaries and how they get reinscribed every now and then, as we know they do. And to the question which Champaka has raised, I don't know how they've gone. Oh, sorry. The two sets of things going on. Yeah, and I think exactly as you say, Champaka, that how would one interpret privatized large-scale infrastructure projects such as privatized airports, etc., and the relationship to cities and their economies, but remain peripheral in their exclusionary governance models? And I think that's, again, into this, at least from my point of view as an anthropologist, to thinking around the role of a range of actors and the local level, regional level dynamics and politics is crucial to figuring this out, that how, even though, and I think Prateek's paper on the brick kilns is that kind of story, that on the one hand, they are peripheral and exclusionary, yet are constitutive and central and of the urban. And I think that's a kind of a exercise which we have to, it's a question of documenting, we can conceptualize it, but the challenge is methodological in my view.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one quick point. First off, thank you for these very, very provocative questions that really, I think, go to the heart of what we're trying to do in this work on peripheral urbanization. These spaces are characterized by their high degree of fragmentation. Fragmentation, whether you're talking about socio-spatial or institutional, and so this idea that you have these overlapping governance regimes, land tenure regimes, regulations, you have, gaps and alongside overlap. So, this is really part of the challenge of working on these spaces, but also it is very central to what explains what's happening there, whether you're talking about why the huge, peripheral housing complexes, for resettlement purposes to some degree, I think that Ram Mohan is referring to, but also, Champaka, these large infrastructure projects on the peripheries, in part because, they're a regulatory no man's land, and you can fix special rules and that kind of thing. So this is really, it speaks to the heart of what we're working on. I don't want to be too long. I know time is precious.
Yes, over to you, Dr. Arjun Kumar.
Thank you. Let me also ask a few questions related to the subject only. But first of all, let me congratulate all of you for being so candid and also taking so many of questions. One thing I really wanted to ask all of you that as cities are growing, especially in the South, South as really has been highlighted by the editors also. And we are looking also from the lower middle income countries, be it China, India, all the South. And we know how the process moves on. And it's quite some time, quite few decades, we have the experiences. What has been the global experiences that how it can be avoided? I'm asking this again because what the experience in India or be it in China also, we see that as the city is expanding, there are also small cities adding, but the bigger cities are, just bulging. And we have for those cities greater, name any city development authority, so many of parastatal or SPBs coming on. So we see over time there is gentrification or there is also vacancy, ghost towns, whatnot. But we see in the matter of 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, everything gets filled up. So how do you see these processes and land prices, other things also, keep changing? In India, we really have a very tough time on the land issue. China has been able to make some mark from there, also integrating the regional economic activities also. And we really highlighted the point of from being an agrarian economy to again, just becoming a city. And a very different kind of city, really led by, and I think Ankita ma'am also highlighted on the real estate property market, how it is changing and becoming exclusionary. So what would be the way forward towards that, looking at the experiences so that we move towards the inclusionary and sustainable urbanization? And also, as the point has been also highlighted, is there any metrics? Because most of the things are also coming very qualitative. Any metrics in your view which should be considered going forward for the urbanization? And on the point of pandemic also, let me also add that all the countries are focusing on capital and infrastructure push. And there is again so much of thrust on urbanization to lead the growth. So how do you see this phenomena going on? Do you see that the topic which we are deliberating today, what would be your response to that? And we can also move to way forward round, or whoever panelist would like to take that. On the policy part also, I'm just skipping that because all countries are focusing from last 1-2 decades on these issues, but not much movement there. We have the urban mission and all. Shubhra ma'am, would you like to reflect upon any of these?
Dr. Kumar, I think we need another panel for this.
Yes.
You raised a whole lot of questions for us. And I think this is where, as at least as researchers, are what we see our roles as to identifying the problem. We leave the solutions to the policymakers. But nonetheless, having said that, the question of the challenge of urbanization and how we think about it is, of course, witnessing us in the scale and the pace of change in the global South is unprecedented and has had significant impacts on both social, ecological, political, and economic dimensions. And it's unraveling and we do not know how it will unfold. Having said that, it is, we know what the forces are. We know who sort of the big actors are the role of the state, the role of capital, the changing role of labor, and is some of the key actors and its kind of impact is we know. So I think big question comes, what is the way in which we can rethink state, how we can rethink governance? And the biggest question is how can we think the nature of capitalist urbanization? I mean, that is what is facing us right now. And perhaps for us to understand, to arrive at solutions, I think we need to first identify what really are the problems and what exactly, especially in the context of climate change, what does sustainability mean? I mean, the sustainable development goals, which the UN has put forward, they become pretty tokenistic beyond a point. And if we really need to think about the challenges which capitalist urbanization faces, is that we think about alternatives to capitalism. So having said that, it's what does it mean? And it takes us down to the question of questions of rethinking the state, rethinking the politics of labor, and the rethinking governance. So only then can we arrive at some kind of a meaningful understanding of sustainability, and sustainability for whom, for what, and for what kind of future. So I think it's a big question. It's a question of how we are envisioning our future and who's envisioning for us. I mean, and I think this is a debate which is raging right now. And I think answers are not there on that pessimistic note.
Great.
Yes, so Dr. Kumar, anything else? Or maybe we should, move forward and sort of wrap up the discussion. I think we are past our time, and, I think certainly for all of us here, it's, getting late, but.
We can have a way forward round from all the panelists.
Yes,
on the topic.
Absolutely. So
Great.
please go ahead. I think
first. Yeah, Ashima, up to you.
Yes, I think I would certainly like to hear from the contributors first, and maybe Carol would like to go first. Maybe Ankita, where do we go forward from the discussion, the debate that we've had here today? And both in policy terms and in terms of this peripheral turn in urban studies, right? Where do we go next?
I think some sort of, sorry, I'm just going in. But yeah, I think it was interesting to sort of think through, I think, sort of my takeaway from this meeting was to think through the kind of methodological questions that were raised. I think in general, some of the questions that were raised by the participants also point to the kind of overlapping of these concepts,
margins, peripheral urbanization, subaltern urbanization, and I think generally within Shubhra's sort of wrapping up was also the question of like what are our methodological premises for sort of capturing these processes. I certainly also feel that, for example, my work on brick kilns also sort of, I also struggle with this question of how to convert this research and to not sort of fall into that anthropological trap of exploitative research, and how to sort of understand peripheral urbanization, but also sort of work with it. So how does everyday concepts of looking at work in the brick kilns, how would that sort of scale out to inform urban policy, which also has sort of a very large impact on subjects outside of its borders. So for me is to sort of challenge all these methodological questions and to, as Shubhra pointed out, to bring out new ways in which we can think through policy, as well as think through new ways of doing research that do not come across as hit and run kind of projects.
Thanks so much, Prateek. I'd love to actually speak to that. I think that's a very important discussion. I think that we need to have, especially at this moment, right? When the pandemic has made various kinds of field work, I think logistically so much more difficult. And at the same time, you're absolutely right that what are the kinds of relationships that we are building in the field. But before I go ahead, I would definitely like to give it over to perhaps Ankita or Liubing, who might want to respond to Prateek, or maybe take on the challenge that Dr. Kumar has for us.
I think I'll just like to speak from my experience in doing fieldwork in Punjab. I think the biggest challenge that I kind of faced, and it's also methodological in terms of the kind of relationship, how to capture these various complex kind of relationships. So, for example, I could see that there is some relationship, some kind of relationship between the Jats and the Baniyas, but I could then sense that there's a significant differentiation even within the Jats, and then I could see that the groups are kind of extremely differentiated, and one. I think we start with looking at these larger groups, but when you go deeper, you see that the inequality is kind of deep there. And how do you kind of understand these complex relationships? Because these relationships are also changing within the group. Within the Jats, there is this idea of refugee Sikhs who would like to kind of, I kind of vaguely get this thing into my thesis, where I kind of understand that there is a lot of things changing within the Jats. For example, refugee Sikhs would like to not identify with the Indian Sikhs. Refugees are essentially who've migrated from the Pakistan part of Punjab, and the Malwai Sikhs are the Indian Punjabi Jat Sikhs. They're both Jat Sikhs, but there's a very complex relationship. Even when I was trying to do survey interviews, refugee Jat Sikhs, when you talk about the caste thing, they write in terms of, they force you to kind of tell you to write it's refugee Jat, and we are Malwai Jat. So these relationships are extremely, you would not at the first go be able to kind of understand these relationships, but how do you actually kind of capture these very changing relationships? So I think it's a methodological question, as well as, I mean, how would one do field work kind of in such complex kind of areas. So I think for me that's a way forward. I would like to kind of get deeper into aspects of intra-group dynamics in these urban, which probably I haven't kind of gotten deeper into my thesis, but get kind of, that's something that I would like to explore. I'm not sure about the methodology, but yes, that will be a challenge.
I really agree with what Ankita was saying. So like this kind of relationality is like so difficult to unravel between different kinds of geographical and cultural contexts, although like maybe they have the same name. And I was just like, because I want to do comparative work, and I feel like just comparison is important and difficult, because I feel like we really need to strike a balance between this, like bring different parts of the world together, and at the same time not homogenize the things at the same thing, because they are different. So I think that just like between China and India, like for example, it's just like the two countries are very different, but there are so many things that I feel like it's extremely important to bring them together, to discuss them together. Today we talked about this fragmentation in the peripheries, and also there's some other questions of labor conditions in times of like both of the countries are really like like really pushing the country forward in terms of economic development and really disciplining the laborers and etc. And then the housing conditions for the laborers. There are so many things we can discuss together. But at the same time, to really also like really focus on this kind of very specific local conditions, like with kind of ethnographic, very deep ethnographic work to bring that local condition out and local story out, and to give voice to the very local to give voice to the local residents and various different kind of local residents. So that's very important to strike the balance.
Yeah, thank you, Liubing. Any other panelists would like to come in?
Carol, ma'am, would you like to?
Yeah, on a slightly different note, more of a conceptual or a category problem. I think a lot of this discussion on agrarian urbanism, urbanization, and so on has, and especially on the kind of post-colonial critique of urbanization theory, has really destabilized the category of the urban, right? Is that, you know, we no longer find these categories to really serve our purpose, and yet we go on talking about intersections and boundaries between these two kinds of spaces. But then what would happen if we dispensed with the categories, right? And, you know, so practically speaking, I think we're looking at so many different types of spaces. It would be nice to describe them with more kind of fine-tuned language. But then I was thinking that then, you know, if you were to simply say that let's do away with these categories, then what about the practical problem? And this relates to the question of the census counts, right? That why do we have this category of census counts? Because we find this process of, you know, of workers moving out of agriculture, and when a certain percentage of the male worker population becomes non-agricultural in their main occupation, it gets defined as urban. And yet there could be something not really very urban in other kinds of everyday meanings about those spaces, right? So then I was thinking about, I'm thinking about this whole question is how would you actually then define these kind of spaces more precisely? But then there's a problem that if you really wanted to redo these categories to capture better what's happening in these different spaces, you can't really do that because researchers depend on these large data sets, census data, NSS data, and the people who organize these surveys are very reluctant to change categories for good reason, because then you can't do comparison over time, right? So it's almost as if you're stuck with these legacy categories in the census, for example, which do not at all capture the reality of the 21st century. But then this is maybe a question more for the statisticians and demographers and so on. I don't know how you would fix that, but there always seems to be a kind of dissonance between the data you can get from these large, you know, data sets, and then what you see happening on the ground, and how do you actually bring them together in your analysis. And this links, sorry, one footnote, this links to Patrick's question about labor migration, right? Because a lot of the reason why these villages are being recategorized as census count is because of layout migration, because most of the male workers are actually becoming labor migrants. So how do you then factor the question of labor and migration into understanding the urban in a way that is not so kind of 19th century as what we see in the census?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Kumar, for those, you know, these questions, which of course are very challenging. I just as a reaction, I'd say that, you know, scholarship, Global South scholarship, it is, I think, really leading the way with regard to some of this, you know, I guess, epistemological kind of innovations that we're talking about. you know, the whole idea of peripheral urbanization, I mean, this is Teresa Caldeira kind of coined that expression working on Brazil. And you know, the idea is that, you know, some of these categories like gentrification, which you mentioned, which is a very important category in urban studies and in suburban kind of studies in the global north, just doesn't really, you know, work or doesn't capture. I mean, it's not effective necessarily in some of the contexts in which we work in the global south, and I think that just demonstrates, you know, the need for you know, kind of post-colonial theory building from the south. And another thing you mentioned about, you know, some of the problems of urbanization. I mean, you know, urbanization is definitely not going away. I mean, this is the movement. And I think one of the things that we can be very conscious of, and I think, and maybe even engaged with, is trying to ensure that this urbanization is not exclusionary. And this is the challenge of our time, and this spans, you know, global north and global south, and I think the work on right to the city, for instance, which is you know, kind of a catchphrase that captures you know, this I think the politics of urbanization. Is really important and needs to move forward. You know, as Shubhra rightly said, you know, it's fine to talk about sustainability, but we have to remember that social sustainability is perhaps the most important dimension of that triangle, beyond economic growth and care for the environment. So I guess I'd end on that note. Complexifying our conception of sustainability.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
I just like to say a couple of things, if I may.
Yes.
You know, just to wrap this up. You know,
And after Dr. Sood, Dr. Gururani will also summarize. Yeah. Okay. Great. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So I think one is, I just like to put in a plug for a paper. You know, just also speaking about collaboration, as Shubhra was saying, you know, paper, you know, I don't know if Ram Mohan and Devdatta are here, also Rajkumar, who contributed to our paper, Loraine and I. We worked on sort of, you know, looking at, you know, the question of methodology, ultimately, you know, questions of data justice in peri-urban Hyderabad. And I think one of the things that really comes out of that is, you know, what Pratik was saying, you know, how do you sort of build relationships in the field that do not feel exploitative? And I really think that particularly in this moment of the pandemic, you know, working towards participatory approaches, right? Building relationships that will actually, you know, allow you a window into your site over the long term is perhaps the way to go. And certainly our work in this Basti that, you know, we worked on in peri-urban Hyderabad, I think one of the main insights there is that, you know, quantitative data, you know, exercises often feel very extractive to community, right? And for good reason. And so that is why qualitative methods are very important. But at the same time, I think I do want to address, you know, Carol's point about, you know, sort of the census categories and, you know, the survey categories. And I think that there's perhaps a reconciliation possible through the concept of the region, which I think we've not really talked about so far. But, you know, whether we think about migration or rather actually new forms of commuting, on which we don't have a lot of data, you know, one of the ways to sort of reconcile a lot of what we are seeing in these disparate case studies is really emergence of new kinds of regions. And certainly I have paid more attention to metropolitan regions, but of course, you know, there are regions that are emerging, you know, for example, in Patiala district or, you know, elsewhere. And I think that that's something that, you know, that may be a category that we have not deployed enough, particularly in India, maybe to an extent even in China. And perhaps that's a category that allows us to bring together a lot of what we are speaking and methodologically helps us to reconcile the quantitative insight and the qualitative fieldwork. Anything that you would like to say, Shubhra?
I have more questions than we started off with, so not really to add, but I think just to reiterate some of the points which have been made, especially what Carol is saying about what does the category of urban mean in this moment. And if you work in, like I do, in the villages of Gurgaon, what is urban, what is rural, what is an urban village? I mean, what are these kind of oxymorons which allow us to complicate this terrain, but also how and if can we intervene and how can we have a conversation with census and demographers to rethink these spaces? Will it help? Will it not? So I do not know, I don't have answers, but more questions that what if, how generative is the capacity space of the urban mean? And perhaps for all of us, I think the periphery offers that kind of decentering and dislodging the centrality of some of these categories. So periphery as a space outside, which is outside the box in some sense, to problematize these tensions which are coming out in the papers, the complexity of the social relations, social structures, which both Liubing and Ankita are talking about, the questions which are coming up. And if it's possible to, reinvigorate the debate around these categories itself and the epistemological and methodological openings that this decentering may offer. So nothing more than just saying, yes, these questions remain and hopefully will keep us going for a while. So thank you on that note.
Thank you. So let me also quickly propose a formal vote of thanks. Yes, a very long session. So really, I would like to thank all of you joining here. And it was really a nice experience when Ashima ma'am and others editors also encouraged to have a focused discussion. And really, most of the times we create a panel discussion, but it was already a good volume of work already there in the journal. And we have also linked on our event page, the link to the journal everyone can see. And I would like to congratulate all the authors and editors for this very special volume on engaging the urban from the periphery. And indeed, it was our pleasure to have all of you here. So on behalf of IMPRI Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies, IMPRI Impact and Policy Research Institute, New Delhi, I would like to thank all of you for joining in our series, The State of Cities, #City Conversations, and today's deliberation on engaging the urban from the periphery. And we had all the, Zufai ma'am could not join, but all the others author here. So thank you very much, Dr. Shubhra Gururani ma'am, Dr. Loraine Kennedy ma'am, Dr. Ashima Sood ma'am, Professor Carol Upadhya, Liubing Xie, Pratik Mishra, Ankita Rathi, and really very fortunate to have very young researchers with you doing very nice work. So I must congratulate all the editors also. And with that, we look forward to having more of your work, also having featuring in our series also, and look forward to interacting more and learning from your excellent work. Thank you once again. Have a nice day and please take care of yourself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Share the videos and podcasts soon. Thank you.
Yes,
Bye.
absolutely.
Bye. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Yes.
Bye.